Welcome to Veristall, a YouTube channel devoted to my horror stories. I'm Brandon Faircloth, and if you enjoy the stories that you hear on this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And also, if you'll click the notification bell button, because my understanding is that a lot of times people don't get notified when a new story goes up if they don't have that selected as well. Today's video is going to be fairly short, but it's also unique in that it's not a video of me reading one of my stories, but rather talking more generally about all of my stories. I frequently get asked by people that have read one of my stories or one of my books or listened to some of my stories on YouTube, do these characters continue on somewhere else? Do these storylines continue on somewhere else? And as people listen to or read more of my stories and read more of my books, they see more and more of the interconnections between different things. And it oftentimes brings the question, how interconnected is all of this? The answer to the first questions are yes. For most of these characters, particularly the main characters of these various books and storylines, there is more. There's either more that's already out there, and depending on what all you've read, there's going to be more coming. Now, obviously, there are characters that die or that are otherwise just out of the story that is being told. But generally, for a lot of people, when their first exposure to my work is a particular story about, say, Dr. Barron and Jason, or Uncle Teddy and Cora, or something to do with the Inner Dark or Incarnata, any of these larger themes and larger characters that continually pop up in things, there's more. But at a larger level and at a broader level, you have the width and the depth of the stories that I'm telling that all interconnect and show parts of this much greater world. So you may have listened to or read a story about an app that helps you find ghosts. Or you may have read something about a corn maze where things aren't quite right. You may have read or heard a number of different things and seen in that phrases or characters or references of some sort that pique your interest or remind you of something else that happens in some other story of mine that you've listened to or read. The reason for that is that the vast majority of the things that I write are interconnected. That's going to be to varying degrees, of course. And obviously, I'm aware of way more connections than are obvious in the things that have been written so far. And it's an ongoing process. Things that are being connected now may not have been apparent a year or two ago to somebody on the outside who's looking in. Things that don't appear to be connected right now may very well be connected in a more obvious fashion 2 years from now. But I also don't spell everything out. There are some things that obviously, if you're reading Outsiders, Book 1, that book is about Dr. Barron and Jason. It's also about other characters and how this part of the world and how these things all affect them. But to a large extent, it's about those two characters. Outsiders Book 2, naturally, is again going to deal largely with those characters. Now again, one of the things that you will see if you've listened to or read much of my work is there are a lot of different characters and not all of them are good. There are going to be times where a story or a portion of a novel is told exclusively from the perspective of somebody that in the broader scheme of the story would be considered to be an antagonist or even a villain. And that's very important to me to show different elements of it and to kind of give the spotlight to different characters as needed, both to give the reader a greater understanding of them and where they come from and their perspective, but also to give a more fleshed out and rich understanding of this portion of the world that's being addressed in that particular story or book. And so because of that, depending on what you're reading, you may be seeing the edge of a much larger canvas And that canvas may be part of a much larger gallery of images that are showing different aspects of a much larger world. I've written quite a few books already, and my intention is to write for the rest of my life. And so I intend on writing quite a few more in the future. And I can tell you that there is much more to come, both in terms of just the quantity and hopefully the quality of the books that are forthcoming in the years to come, but also just how deep the rabbit hole goes in terms of how some of these things connect, the way some of these characters are going to intersect and interact with each other, and just the overall exploration of this broader world, which I love so much being able to share with all of you. There's a lot more to it. And my hope is that I do a good enough job of explaining and making these books accessible for both people who have read a lot of my stuff, as well as people that are jumping in for the first time. And I understand not everybody's going to jump in at the same spot, and there's no one right spot, because again, these are, like different little islands in a vast sea, and they all interconnect to some extent, and you're going to see one from the shores of another. But by the same token, there is some level of disorientation that can take place if you're not sure how this ties to everything else and you feel like you're missing out on something. So, with all of that being said, I'll say this. For those that are asking for advice as far as where to go and what to look at, or how to get started on reading all the different stuff that I've written, my suggestions would be one of a couple of different things. I publish my books predominantly through Amazon at this point. I've done it through other methods in the past. I may do it through other methods in the future, but for right now, that's what works for me. It's easy. It's a good way of having a centralized location, and it gives me the opportunity to provide both paperback as well as digital versions of my books at a reasonable cost. And it's as a lot of people know, it's become a very ubiquitous platform for books at this point, and that's one of the main reasons that I use it. My books are set up in such a fashion where, to a very large extent, you can read them in any order you want, but the easiest order is probably starting with the earliest and working your way forward. And when I say earliest, I mean earliest by publication date. Bear in mind a couple of things. There are books that are published on Amazon that were previously published through some other way. So if you're not sure and you see one like, say, Whimsical Leprosy, which was one of the first books that I published through Amazon, it came out in 2017 and it says 2017. But if you look at something like, say, my book Darkness or my novella Mystery, those were actually published originally earlier, but they didn't appear on Amazon until later. So if you just look at the date on the webpage, it may give you a wrong idea of when it was published. So, one way of starting is just start at the beginning, the very first things that I published, which is going to be Darkness and Mystery, and kind of working your way forward. Now, obviously, that's going to be a lot. I mean, I've written a lot of books and I keep writing them, so that's going to be a long way of doing it. The second way, which is a little bit quicker, is you start with The Outsiders Book 1 and you work your way forward from that. And just go by publication date for that. Now, that method is good if you're focused more on Dr. Barrett and Jason and their storyline, things dealing with the Outsiders, the House of the Claw, things like that. If you're wanting a broader picture, then you may want to walk it back and start with something like You Saw Something You Shouldn't Have, which is a collection of short stories. But again, you can always fill in those gaps or swap between books, obviously. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of doing it. But if you're wanting kind of a starting point, I'll say either start with Mystery and Darkness or start with Outsiders and or maybe You Saw Something You Shouldn't Have. And then work your way forward that way. The other way you can go is, maybe you don't want to read or like start the process right now of reading a ton of different books, and that's perfectly understandable. If you have something that you're reading or that you've listened to that you enjoy, then identify which book that came from and then start there. Because if it's part of an ongoing storyline with main characters like Dr. Bear and Uncle Teddy, things tied to a particular place or entity, be it the Inner Dark, which those stories are not out in book form yet, but that will be coming, and or Incarnate or something like that. There are different ways of approaching that. By the same token, if you listen to a particular short story and you're interested in more short stories that are similar, I write a lot of different types of short stories. They're all horror, but they do have a variety of themes and all. But to some extent, and this is only to some extent, but to some extent, thematically there are connections. Aside from the interconnectedness of everything, or most everything, there are some thematic connections between short stories that appear in the same book. It's not an absolute rule, but my point in that is, if you're looking for something that is similar to the story that you just read or heard, look for the book of mine that has that story in it. And so that's kind of a quick way of just like, I just want some more short stories by this author. Kind of similar to this. Obviously not too similar, but kind of similar to this. Well, if you look through my books, you can go and do a preview and you'll see a table of contents at the beginning of each book. And so you can kind of identify, well, this is the story that I listened to or that I read. And now I want to go back and I want to read more of that type of short story. So, I'm going to go with this book as a good starting point. There's nothing wrong with that too. Like I say, I try to make sure that every book, even books that are not the first book in a series of books, are not hostile to new readers. I want everybody to feel like they can jump in and have a good starting point. But by the same token, as they delve deeper into that world and these characters and these stories, they're hopefully going to be enjoying it. They're going to be interested in it. And I'm giving them enough clues to let them know where to go to get more of that. But that being said, I'm doing this video more just to kind of give a little bit of additional guidance. Real quickly, if you're looking for more Dr. Barron, Jason, House of the Claw, that overarching storyline, you're looking for the Outsiders books primarily. If you're looking more about Uncle Teddy and Cora, you're looking for the first book that's come out, and there's going to be more Uncle and Teddy and Cora that come. And sometimes you'll get things that pop up in other books related to all of these characters. But for now, the name of the book that's out in relation to Uncle Teddy and Cora is My Uncle Makes Dolls to Replace Souls in Hell, which was the name of the first story that I wrote in connection with those characters and appears in that book. If you're looking for more about the world of Incarnata and stories that tie to that and the creatures that come from there, the first book for that is Incarnata. And then, again, there's a number of different short story collections that tie into different things as well as other novels and short stories and novellas and different things that you can find throughout the different collection of works that are in Amazon. So this is a little bit longer than I intended for it to be, but I wanted to give a good, clear explanation because, like I say, I understand going into it fresh, it can be hard to know. And I want people to have access to all of my work, and I want people to know where to find it. So, as always, I'm going to point you to the description of the video. It'll have a link that takes you right to the page where you can see all of my books. You can also go to my website and get announcements and news that way. I'm going to have a new video that's coming out soon that's going to be the start of a new series of videos that I think is going to be really interesting. And it's an older series of stories, but something that's always been very popular and that I've never read before. And so we'll see how everybody likes that. But for now, as always, thank y'all very much for listening. Thank y'all very much for reading. Having y'all read my stuff is a great gift, and it's something that I appreciate each and every day. And like I say, I intend on doing it for a very long time, and hopefully you'll continue listening. So with that being said, I'll talk to y'all soon, and enjoy the books.